Good evening. India hosted the first summit between India and Central Asian countries today. The agenda was an expansive one and leaders agreed on a whole lot of issues. There will be a joint working group on Chabahar port. There will be another joint working group on Afghanistan. India and some willing Central Asian countries will be holding joint counter-terrorism exercises going forward. And that brings us to our In Focus tonight, which is first India-Central Asia Summit and the takeaways from it. To discuss that, we are joined by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, former Indian Ambassador to Canada and South Korea, and Professor Swaran Singh with the School of International Studies in GNU. I welcome you both to Newsnight. Professor Singh, has there been a significant upswing in ties, particularly since July 2015, that is since Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited the 5 Central Asian countries? And do you expect that vibrancy is only going to gain momentum going forward, considering the host of decisions that have been taken? A decision has also been taken to hold this summit every 2 years, and greater engagements at different levels, for example, trade and commerce ministers levels, has also been planned going forward, other than the regular foreign ministers level consultations that have been instituted.
Thank you, Manmohan. I think one has to look at both the pull factors and push factors that are bringing India and Central Asian nations together again with new enthusiasm in some ways. And as you mentioned, from 2015 visit of Indian Prime Minister for the first time to all 5 Central Asian republics, followed by the 3 rounds of India-Central Asia dialogue at foreign ministers level, then of course National Security Advisors meeting on regional security, which also included all these 5 nations. There is a very clear expectation, particularly from an inaugural summit meeting of this nature, which has to outline what would be the drivers, what would be the frame, what would be the specifics to achieve. And one could notice that, the Prime Minister has laid out as to what are going to be short-term, long-term goals, what structures and what frequency, what areas to focus on. And that, I think, is a good start and continues that upswing momentum that has been built over the last 5 years in that relationship. Now, very briefly to talk about pull and push factors. Immediate factor, of course, is repeatedly underlined is Afghanistan and need for regional security, regional stability, which is equally requirement for Central Asian republics. 3 of them actually share land borders with Afghanistan. And India, both Central Asian republics and India has a large number of Afghans living in these countries, and the United Nations is no longer only talking of humanitarian aid to Afghans in Afghanistan. There's a separate initiative to look after also Afghans who have gone to other countries. And therefore, what happens in Afghanistan has a direct impact on these 2 countries. And of course, long term, India would be a major importer of energy, whether it is uranium, gas or oil from these countries. In fact, India and China would be virtually taking 50% of global market of energy for imports and exports. And that is a long-term interest of India in these countries. And so also these countries interest in a huge market of India to engage with. And very quickly, the push factor is increasing exponential growth of Chinese engagement with these countries, investment and trade. And we saw how hurriedly they set up a meeting with China as well. I mean, these leaders were supposed to be traveling to India if Omicron spike had not happened. That means the Chinese summit meeting was set up just in a matter of few days. Yes. And that is why the outcome and joint statement is so lukewarm in that sense, which underlines that China today feels overwhelmed by both Russian expanding interest and engagement with Belarus, Kazakhstan and others, and increasing interest of Central Asia with India. And therefore, China perhaps is endorsing the fact that China is noticing and assessing that India's connection with Central Asia is going to be on upswing in coming times. And that's a good indication from India.
Okay. Professor Singh, why do you think the Central Asian countries are keen on greater engagement with India? Do they also not want the preponderance of China to continue?
I assume none of the countries would like to seek exclusive control of another country on their economy. And we can go on talking about the debt-trapped diplomacy that the Chinese have sort of perpetrated on several nations in India's neighborhood and also in Central Asia. The kind of investments they have made on huge projects are sometimes not economically viable. That's a well-known story. So fundamentally, these 5 countries have seen an exponential growth of Chinese investments of up to now $136 billion, trade being $40 billion, and now In the summit meeting, Xi Jinping said he wants to take the trade to $70 billion in 5 years. And that makes these Central Asian republics very conscious of not putting all eggs in one basket. So whether it is Russia's exclusive security connect with these nations or China's exclusive economic connect with these nations, they would definitely be looking for other alternative engagements. And India is a huge country to be engaged. And it's not just economic relationship, it's also strategic, political, cultural, all kinds of relationships that they see India potentially being able to build and deliver enormous amount of advantages. For example, we may not be very big in doing things with the Central Asian republics in the last 30 years, but look at the range. India has built partnerships in about a dozen sectors which are significant for these countries and also for India. Hydrocarbons, uranium, gas and oil, education, pharmaceuticals, technologies in terms of space, cyber, information technologies, whole sort of sectors is where they see potentially India can engage with them. And very quickly, let me add, I think this multilateral frame of looking at going back to CHABAHAR is really to overcome the limitations of United States being very sensitive and threatening of sanctions. And very quickly, I think we need to also understand that there is a foot in the door kind of an opportunity here. Taliban has been making after 30 years positive remarks about TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline again. They also make good noises. So connectivity, which is the biggest challenge for India when it comes to engaging Central Asia, is seeing certain kind of optimism again appearing, and that primarily is because both sides feel equally interested in building that engagement, and the whole kind of run up to this summit meeting and the upswing that you mentioned in your initial remarks from last 5 years is a reflection of both sides being interested in building that relationship with each other, and that should make it possible. And I think the specifics that have come out in today's conversations, particularly from Indian Prime Minister's speech, showcases a very clear seasoned thinking as to how inch by inch, foot by foot we need to move forward. And that structured kind of engagement becomes much more credible and gives greater hope that things will move forward in much more organized fashion. And if we go step by step and brick building kind of strategy we take forward, I think there is a greater likelihood of this, as Prime Minister said, being the new frame for the next 30 years of engagement between Central Asia and India. And I assume that both sides have an enormous amount of pull and push factors to continuously build new partnerships and strengthen their older partnerships.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, for having joined us with your views on Newsnight tonight.